Welcome. We're really glad that you came. The weather's probably as good as it's going to get right now. And so we will be videoing this not only for you all, but in case we aren't able to have our meeting this evening, then we will be posting it to everything you can think of in LISD so that parents who weren't able to attend would be able to hear the conversation. And then, of course, you know, we're here most nights, weekends, and days. So, you know, feel free to contact us. So I am thrilled to have Holly Captain back with us, and she has been our auditor. And not only are we very pleased with the work that she has done, but the person who is in charge of her entire company is very pleased with the audit as well. And so that makes her very happy. So without further ado, here's Holly.
Thank you. Is this loud enough? Everybody can hear me? Okay, great. First of all, thank you for coming out today. I know this is unusual weather. This doesn't usually happen. Usually it's supposed to be nice and warm when I come to Dallas. So I'm from Iowa. So no matter what kind of weather you have, it's usually an improvement over what we have. So since we've been hovering between 0 and 10 degrees for the last few days, this is fine with me. It's not snow. So we were here at the end of October, and we actually concluded our site visit on the 31st, and then went home and did a bunch of data crunching to do a very comprehensive evaluation of gifted and talented services and program here in Louisville ISD. We were a team of 12, and we made visits to all the schools. And so this is really the summary of what we found and what we reported back to the district. The written report is around 220, 230 pages, and I believe it is currently on the district website, so you have access to that in its complete form. And so I'll be going over findings and even more importantly, recommendations that we made to the district, but I encourage you to go ahead and ask questions. If you need any clarification, you can ask at any time, just raise your hand. And Debbie Roby will be assisting just with the microphone because they're videotaping this so that it can be available to any parents who could not make it today. And we are still scheduled to do this again this evening from 6 to 8 p.m. so far. I can be there for sure because I'm not afraid of any weather, but if things get canceled, then maybe not. Okay, so the purpose of the evaluation, I think this is a very important point, that it was your district that actually initiated this evaluation. The state does require program evaluation for GT every so often, and so district leaders decided this would be a good idea for your program and for your services. This evaluation also was intended to serve as a model for how they would internally review and evaluate gifted and talented services as well for the future. So bringing in an outsider like my company, CMSI, has the benefit of being completely objective. We don't work for Louisville. In essence, we don't work for the state. All of the audit team, we've never worked here in the district, so we had no vested interest in any of the findings. And so we just came in with probably as objective a view as we could have. And what we did is we have our own standards that we use in addition to state standards for gifted and talented programs. And so the report is basically findings of where the district fell short of meeting our standards. And we also have a section that's still coming that's more specifically how well the district has met the state criteria for gifted and talented services. And I want to point out here that when we go in and evaluate school districts and when we're using our standards are really supposed to be representative of what we consider to be ideal. It would be a very different report if we were coming in and comparing you to other districts. So this is an exception report. In other words, we just report where the gaps or the weaknesses are. We don't do a lot of commendations, pats on the back, things like that. As Fenn English likes to say, nobody comments because the trains are running on time. They only comment when they're not on time because everybody expects the trains to run on time. And that's sort of how an audit or an evaluation of this type, it's a similar approach. We expect things to be done well for students and for students to be benefiting, and so we report where there are gaps or weaknesses. I would like to point out, since we are a group of parents, and I think it's helpful, I can share just from my own personal experience and the experience of my team members how Louisville compares in what we see typically when we visit other school districts of like size and clientele. Yes?
So, thank you. So on that, so then is the comparison, sorry. So on that then, the comparison is not to other districts,
Right.
but it's to
Our set of
acceptable-
standards.
Which is based on what, how do you come to that? Is it based on national GT, what you see programs are like?
That's a good question. So we did do, the state criteria are based on research and what they feel to be national trends and what's best practice for gifted and talented education. Our standards are really from best practices just in business management, except applied in an educational setting, because it's very different when you're in an educational setting from being just in a business or a factory setting producing inanimate objects, because we see the work that a district does as being the delivery of learning to students. Every student is unique. So it's different than, say, building cars or building or putting together clothing or things of that nature, because children have different needs, have different backgrounds, have different experiences, and so you can't approach each child from a formulaic standpoint, and we realize that. But we do apply some of our standards, and I'll go through our 5 standards. They've actually been in place, and we've used them we've been auditing since 1979. So over 30 years, and we've done audits now in, I think, about 450 school districts here in the U.S. and abroad. And in multiple places, in several districts, we've actually gone in and audited multiple times over time. We don't like to go in less than 5 years, but we've had districts that we audited now, 20, 25 years ago, and we've gone back for repeat visits. So we look this is the scope of our evaluation. We look very intensely at your curriculum, and also instruction. So that was really the purpose of our site visits, was not just looking at the documents and what students are expected to learn, which is what we consider the curriculum to be, but we also wanted to see how is it actually being delivered in the classroom. And that's why we went into classrooms where there were gifted and talented students in the classroom. Either they're clustered classrooms or also in the actual GT facilitators. And then in the middle school, we did the LEAP classes, as well as pre-AP and then AP classrooms at the high schools. So we also looked at many things in the system that maybe they don't seem directly related to GT, but they do in fact influence or impact GT programming. So things like the organizational structure within the system, that actually has a strong impact on how the GT program is set up and how it's run. And so those were some things that we looked at as well. And so it's sort of, it's a balancing act of positioning the report. We have to address the GT program itself, but then we also address a few things, particularly in Standard 1 and Standard 5, that are more system level issues, but have an impact on the GT program. So we looked at, and this is true when we look at any program or when we're looking at the comprehensive school district, how well has your system set good goals for your gifted and talented students? How well is it doing in meeting those goals, and how well is it using and deploying its resources toward that end? And then how well has it been improving its performance over time in serving GT students? And so our report, our findings, our responses to those queries. So here are the data sources that we use, and these are consistent with any audit or program evaluation that we conduct in any school district. We look at tons of documentation, any kind of curriculum guide, memos, plans, policies, procedures. We looked at just about every single board policy that you have. We looked at job descriptions. We looked at the organizational charts. pretty much any piece of paper, electronic or hard copy that they threw at us, we reviewed to see if it was pertinent or not, and then if it was, we wrote it up in some fashion to see if it supported our findings and to actually to develop our findings. We also looked at assessment instruments and data and some samples of student work. And then we conducted interviews. We had many parent interviews, many parent interviews. We interviewed, we surveyed students, and we talked to some students informally during classroom walkthroughs. We interviewed teachers, the GT facilitators, all the principals, and then we also went into the classrooms for observational data. Then we did surveys. Even though we get into the schools and we set up a lot of interview times, we never feel like we talk to enough people to get the most comprehensive feedback. So we did offer online surveys to parents, and we did parents, students from 3rd grade up, as well as teachers and principals. And we had very good responses. I think we got almost all the principals. We had several hundred teachers, and we had over 1,100 parents. Yes, question? Okay. So when we talk about our findings as well as our recommendations, we like to organize it in 2 main categories. We have those things that pertain to design work. Those are the things that are in writing. Those are the things that the goals, the documents, the policies, the plans that the district, usually these things happen at the district level and they're put in place, and that's all considered design work. Then we have what we call delivery work. And that's data, and that's why our site visits are so important, because you can have great goals and wonderful plans and fabulous policies and nobody's using them. And so really the delivery piece is looking at, are these things being used? Are they being followed? And if they are they having the desired impact? So we approach this all divided into these 2 areas, and the design questions that we ask are these things, are the goals, plans, policies, are they there? Is curriculum there for the students? And then we ask, is it any good? And we have some measures of quality, but some of the criteria that we use to evaluate curriculum in particular are your own criteria, the district's own expectations for curriculum. So what does the district say its curriculum should look like? And we also had another layer of what does the state say curriculum should do? And so when we talked about the quality of the curriculum, those were some things that we reported back. And then when we looked at delivery, we looked at to what extent are the teachers using or following policies, plans, particularly curriculum when it comes to the teachers. And then we also looked at survey data regarding use of things, use of curriculum, use of resources and materials, and also from principals, and then looking at student work as well. So now we can get into what we found. And I'm going to talk here, because this isn't the report, I'm going to talk about some of the positive things. And if I were doing a comparison of Louisville ISD against other districts across the state, or even across the nation, because I go all over the country and do this very frequently, you really have a very robust gifted and talented program. It is very robust. The district has committed strong resources to support the program and to ensure that kids are being served. Obviously, there are areas needing improvement, and we identified those areas in the report, and I will talk to those here shortly. But in terms of if I were comparing you to other systems, I would say you're probably in the top 10, 15% in the nation as far as having solid GT programming, a good structure in place. You have, and that's really critical. I mean, I was just in a district in St. Louis that hasn't had GT services for any of its kids in probably a decade. And it's not because they don't have GT kids, as they don't have the money and the resources to do it. So that is very commendable, and that's the kind of thing that does not come out in the report at all. You have a very supportive community, very supportive parents. You have very involved parents as well, and I think that's always a strength when you have parents, because in my experience being a parent, and I have 3 kids, I have kids at, in terms of grades, both ends of the spectrum. And when you're a parent, you know your child best. And and we heard from parents that had concerns or frustrations because they just knew their child's needs were not being met in the way that their child learned and the things that they needed. And I think those are valid concerns because parents know their children better than anybody else. So there's a very supportive community here. And so I don't forget, there is actually an opportunity to sign up or express interest if you want to serve on a task force or a focus group to have input about GT program planning. So we also found a very strong commitment to casting a wider net. Louisville is an extremely diverse population. You have so many different language groups, so many different ethnic groups, tons of economic diversity. You have every type of diversity you can think of. And that can be a real challenge. And what we noted was a trend over the last 10 years to very intentionally seek to identify gifted kids in non-traditional settings. And that is, if you look at the national research literature, that is really a challenge, particularly in low economic areas. And yet giftedness exists across the economic spectrum. And any child that does not get identified, to me, that's a wasted resource. I mean, that's a tremendous value and benefit to society as a whole. And so we want to access and serve those kids' needs. And if I can get on my soapbox just for a minute, we did a literature review prior to this and made that available to parents as well. And I think, is that also on the district website?
Yes, it's in the audit report as well.
So it's in the audit report, but we just did a broad review of literature, just research from the last probably 10 to 20 years on gifted ed. And one of the things that really came out in the lit review, which I kind of had known, but was fascinating to me to see confirmed in research, was that gifted children whose needs are not served, it can have terrible consequences. So if their needs are not served, they can either go underground, where they sort of deny their giftedness and sort of, try and act like I'm not gifted or act dumb, if you will, and try to just blend in and sort of, fade into the background. Or they can turn extremely naughty and be actually social deviants. I mean, be very rebellious, and so it's really in everybody's best interest to seek to meet these kids' needs and to continue to stimulate them. And I hear stories all the time from parents and grandparents about kids who, teachers who don't understand them think, well, they're just annoying because they won't stop asking questions. And I say, there's a mind that is just crying out to be fed and is not getting fed and wants to know everything. And we have kids that have brains like that, and God help us, we have to try and find out what's going to meet that need. So we felt the district has really done a commendable job in casting that wider net and seeking to identify giftedness. So there is a school-wide culture. This was very interesting for us going into the classrooms because we found that there really is, in Louisville, a culture that is really promoting problem solving and more hands-on student-centered learning and things that people are really good at talking about, but frankly, not that great at doing. And that's one of my personal frustrations in public education because we all talk about it and we say, oh, we want hands-on learning and critical thinking and problem solving. And then I go into a lot of classrooms in a lot of districts in a lot of different states. And I'm many times just disappointed or saddened that there are wonderful opportunities with plenty of resources available that people are not making good use of. And in Louisville, I think we saw probably some of the best evidence of different types of differentiation than we've seen in, again, it was probably in the top 10%. Now, that doesn't mean there was not room for improvement. There's definitely room for improvement. Some of those trends tend to be building-based. So if there was a strong principal that really was promoting that district initiative, that district focus, then it was definitely evident in classrooms. And that's typical. But district-wide, I would say that commitment to being more focused on problem solving and critical thinking was the majority versus a minority focus. And that's really important for gifted kids because gifted kids need opportunities to do their own thing and to have some autonomy over the work that they're doing and some choice in what they're doing. And so I'll talk a little bit more specifically about the kinds of differentiation that we saw in the classroom, and then we made some recommendations on other things, other ways to strengthen that. And also, what we like to see is we want those opportunities for students not to be isolated in any classrooms. We want that to be consistent district-wide, where all teachers are making use of that. So the differentiation that we saw was mostly in process and product, how kids were able to complete assignments and the kinds of products they could show or produce to demonstrate their learning. And we also saw some initial steps to integrate GT services with other content areas, and that's actually something that we definitely want to see. It really doesn't help a classroom teacher if the classroom teacher has to go to separate curricula to find things for GT kids. If she or he is teaching mathematics, if they have to then go to a totally separate place to find some suggestions on what to do with the gifted and talented students, that's not very efficient. And a lot of times teachers won't do it. And so we did see some integration across content areas, particularly in elementary mathematics, which is a real strength. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more too, because that actually then turned into a recommendation to do more of that. But that was something that we wanted to note that was positive. So our first standard is what we call our control standard. And this right here is going to be just the summary of our findings. And like I said, the specific findings can be found in the report, and they are organized by our 5 standards. So the first standard, or control standard, is whether or not a system is in control of its policies, personnel, and practices. And so that really means that if the central office has set policy, then the expectation is that decisions are being made congruent with the guidelines of that policy. If that's not happening, then we say a system is not in control of itself. And when a system's not in control of itself, then there's no accountability as well. When policies are weak or not clear or they're not present, it's really hard to have control over a system. And it's even more difficult to hold people accountable for goals, mission, and expectations. So part of standard 1 then, part of the control issue is an organizational structure that supports implementing decision-making in congruence with policy. And what we found is that there is a commitment to staffing for the GT program. So just specific to GT, we really felt that given the size of the district and the needs and the number of students involved, that there really wasn't adequate staffing at the district level to do everything that needs to be done to manage the program, and even more importantly, to develop curriculum for the program. There is curriculum in place for elementary, and it's good curriculum. We found it was strong, but there's really not at secondary. And that was probably the major weakness. So that, and we attribute that, so that's another finding under standard 2, but we can really see the cause of that in standard 1 because of some staffing issues. So it's really just been Debbie and her assistant. And that's just, writing curriculum is very arduous and time consuming, and as well as watching implementation and making sure that delivery matches design. And so that was one of our main findings under standard 1. We also found that policies were somewhat weak, and GT planning, even though it's happened and is happening informally and verbally, and there's a lot of documentation out there about the GT program and services, there's no single plan that directs GT programming for the next 5 years. And so that was another major finding in under standard 1. Okay, standard 2 is what we call our direction standard. And so under direction, we look for clear goals and objectives, especially objectives for student learning. So what is it that the student should walk away with? Now, we did find that there are characteristics, there are objectives defined for the GT students. It's the competencies, and that those are defined and have been identified as something that they want kids to walk away with. However, the curriculum, particularly middle school and high school, there's not a clear linkage between what the kids are expected to be learning and doing in the classroom and those competencies. And then this will be seen also in Standard 4. How is evidence of mastery of those competencies being measured? That was another weakness. So you have to have clear goals and objectives. Here's what kids will be able to do, whatever skill, concept, process, practice, knowledge. And then here's how they're going to develop or demonstrate mastery, and here's how we're going to measure their progress and be able to report that back to parents. Yes?
Can you give an example of what a competency is?
Oh, Debbie, you might be able to do a better job of that, but she asked if we can give an example of a competency. Like one example might be that they can think critically in new situations, and it might be evidenced in writing a paper or doing a project, presenting, both sides of an issue.
Things like being self-aware. Am I a good listener or am I a leader? When is the right time to lead? When's the right time to follow? Speak, listen, problem solving, critical thinking, all that's involved in that. Communicating, what type of a communicator am I? Research, how capable am I at conducting research and understanding the validity of source and that type of thing. So they're more, call them capacities, or more of the 21st century skills that will carry you through. And as they say in the business world, those are the things that will surely help you keep a job.
Yes.
That are those kind of intangibles that need to be practiced many, many times over time.
And so another thing about the GT capacities is that they transcend content areas. I mean, kids should be able to demonstrate those capacities in any content area, be it math, science, home economics, family and consumer science, English. And so that then requires that the curriculum be structured to do that, to support teachers in delivering that and in teaching those capacities. So we saw good evidence of that at elementary and in some of the LEAP curriculum at middle school, because those guys have been developed by the GT department. So we saw good evidence of teaching and giving teachers suggestions and resources for teaching those capacities. But we saw less evidence of that, none actually in high school, and then less in middle school because the LEAP program is confined to English language arts. So in just other content areas, we did not see enough connections with the GT capacities and GT expectations. And also, we didn't see good, strong enough connections in making suggestions for how teachers can differentiate for their clustered kids in the regular classroom. Yes?
So does that?
Oh, can we get the microphone to you? Sorry. No, that's okay.
I don't have my phone.
We're going to make Debbie run.
It's getting worse.
So I think you're addressing my confusion. I have
Okay.
a gifted, talented child that is in AP courses, but I don't see why or what differentiates him from somebody who doesn't have that label.
Right. Yes. You're not confused. That's the issue.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I just want to make sure I'm on the
Nope.
same track.
You are 100%.
Okay.
That is exactly the issue,
Okay.
and that's what we found. AP can meet some gifted kids' needs, but it never should be considered a catch-all because it's not. And the College Board doesn't say that it is. It is intended to be a college-like course that teaches college-level content. It's not necessarily taught in a way that addresses gifted kids' different needs. And that was one of the main issues under the AP program and under Standard 2, that's a big gap at the high school. And so we recommended some very different things. And I think that's also where that parent input is going to be important, because this is, and I shared when I addressed the board a month or so ago, I don't remember when that was now, but when I addressed the board, Louisville could be a true model. I mean, if the high school thing, if you do some really innovative things, because you're already doing some innovative things in this district, and so the potential is immense. But just AP in and of itself, no, it's probably not meeting your kids' needs, because there were a lot of teachers, and we heard this from many parents And on the survey, that many AP teachers don't do anything different for the GT kids than they do for anybody else. And that's a weakness. Yeah.
And how much of that is really related to how the structure is? Because if you look back to the elementary school, okay, your LEAP, your gifted LEAP, whatever you want to call it, is a pull-out class, right?
Yes.
So your student comes out, they come out of the normal classroom, and they have the ability, that LEAP teacher has, within parameters, has the ability to cross all genres of education, of classification, whether it's history, or it's math, or it's English, and wrap all of that up into a big bundle to work with those children.
Right.
You move to middle school, you alluded to it yourself, the only opportunity there is in English and language arts.
Or
which
ostensibly pre-AP.
which also technically impedes those GT students who are also very academic in the sciences and mathematics, which is your STEM program. And then when you move to the high school, it gets even worse in the segregation of where you really have the ability to do anything gifted, because you truly are fitted into these AP classes, which you are in a situation where you're with other AP kids, but they're not necessarily gifted children. Now, I'm a parent of 16 years now, students through LISD, through Marcus Feeders. I have 4 children. 2 have graduated out of Marcus, and I have 1 in middle school and 1 in elementary. All different levels. I have 1 child who's GT, 1 who was classified GT, but we chose not to do the GT program because it was not even where it is today, that many years ago. And so I've seen growth that just, for those of you who parents are somewhat newer, younger, I guess, there's huge strides that have been made in the GT program, but I will say we are nowhere close to where we need to be to meeting those needs of those kids. But I think it really ties back to the delivery of how we structure our classroom and how we handle the classroom schedules for these children.
Yes, scheduling is definitely going to be an issue. It always is at high school, especially when there are block schedules. That can always be a challenge. I think too, one of the things that you brought out is that at the elementary, and because scheduling at elementary is far less challenging, and there's a lot more flexibility, that teachers, those facilitators can pull kids out and work with small groups, and that is a real strength. At the high school, we did suggest doing some kind of courses that are, just for GT kids or that GT kids can sign up for. But one of the things that we found with AP, and that there's a lot of flexibility, and when you really get familiar with the College Board and their philosophy and their intent, there's a lot of flexibility within AP programming to do more of the GT capacity type learning, more hands-on critical thinking, but that is still very teacher dependent. And some of the AP teachers, they've been teaching, they're very comfortable with how they've been teaching for 20, 30 years, and they maybe don't teach that way and don't differentiate. And so then those GT kids aren't having those needs met. So it could work, but there also is a level of intensity in AP because it is intended to be college prep. It is a college course. So there's a level of intensity there in terms of the quantity of work in many cases that can actually be anathema to some GT kids. They don't want to do more work. They want to think, but they don't necessarily want to just, work hard. So, or do more work, or what they just consider to be, some eat it up and they get really excited about it, and others that actually turns them off. And it really does not make any difference how smart they are, because I've seen kids that are just brilliant who don't want to have anything to do with an AP course, because they're going to tell me what books I have to read, and they're going to make me read, this many books this week, and then I'm going to have to do this, this, and this, and that's not the kind of work I want to do, because they are more don't tell me what to do.
The scheduling that you were talking about, though, that we're hitting with in high school is also now kind of intruding on the middle schools as well.
Sure.
For example, my son is a 7th grader taking algebra. He'll be taking geometry. The only place it's offered is at the high school. So therefore, he has to go to the high school to take geometry. And in place, when he gets back to his middle school campus, he's got a study skills class and teacher's aid.
Oh.
What use is that for a gifted child to be punished in that realm because there isn't the opportunity for anything else at the campus.
And we did actually talk about that too, that whole differentiation. I'll get to that with standard 3 because that's a really good point with the scheduling and how kids are accessing the content that they need. So those multidisciplinary connections, GT extensions were inadequate in the regular curriculum. We wanted to see more of that. There have been some extensions done with elementary math, but we want to see that repeated in other content areas. And we just have AP curriculum just plain inadequate. So it's still very teacher dependent based on their syllabi that they produce. So now let's talk about standard 3 because this is where we talked a little bit more about service delivery and what kids were accessing. Standard 3 for us is it's the equity standard as well as what we call the connectivity standard or the alignment/consistency standard. What we look for with standard 3, we want to see connections between design and delivery. So if you say this is what our goal is, this is what we want kids to learn, are we seeing that reflected in practice and what's actually going on in classrooms? And so those are the things that we address under standard 3. In this standard, we talked a little bit about the identification process. We said that it's very comprehensive, that there are more tools being used, and really in comparison to other districts, this was a definite strength. There's still some more work to do. Again, it tended to be building dependent. So we just want to see that consistent district-wide. Then when we talked about differentiation, so this gets at that whole pre-AP, AP issue. So I want to just spend a little bit of time explaining differentiation because what that means is when you're trying to teach, you're trying to differentiate or make your instruction different according to the needs of individual kids. And that can be done in a classroom setting. However, it requires doing flexible modalities of instruction, which means grouping kids flexibly, putting kids in small groups. That's why the GT kids are clustered in their elementary classrooms, so they can be grouped strategically and work in small groups with other GT kids that would be of a like pace and maybe some similar approaches to some of their problem solving. And also because we know that it's good for kids to work in groups and to work cooperatively. Research has shown that's a very strong, it is a best practice. For GT kids, and this also came out in the Lit Review, it's good for them also to be with other peers that are not gifted. Although for a teacher, so they need to be heterogeneously grouped in a regular classroom. They will make great strides cognitively if they're all grouped, like if you had a whole class of just GT kids, but socio-emotionally, it's absolutely toxic. That's what the research has found. And so you can imagine why. I mean, for some kids, it would be absolutely miserable for them, or dog-eat-dog, or because some are ultra competitive and others don't want to have anything to do with that. So, because there is no single profile of a gifted, talented kid. That's the challenge. We're all unique individuals. So when we talk about differentiation, we talk about how can a teacher address these different needs. Well, you have two ends of the spectrum. You have gifted kids, you have kids that are maybe disabled or challenged. And the Lit Review revealed that when you are deciding your groups and you are balancing classrooms, it's not actually best practice to give a teacher both ends of the spectrum. So if a teacher has the very top kids and a group of the very low kids, that's a tremendous burden on any teacher. You still want heterogeneous grouping, but you want that to be more, if you have, say, 5 groups along that continuum, you want the top 4 or the bottom 4. I shouldn't even say bottom because you still have high achieving kids in there with your lower group. But that's one of the things that we found. There was great inconsistency across campuses how decisions are made in putting classrooms and balancing classrooms. And so we said that really needs to have a little more consistency, some clear guidelines on how that's going to be done to ensure that teachers aren't really burdened, and also to be strategic about which teachers are getting the clusters of GT kids, because there's research about being more intentional with the teachers. Gifted kids tend to do better with your sharper, more gifted teachers who understand giftedness, which is also another reason why the district has done so much training and required training on nature and needs so that teachers who have gifted kids understand giftedness and can address that more effectively. But that's just training that needs to be ongoing all the time. So, also about differentiation. We look at differentiation in 3 different ways. So you can differentiate or teach differently in process. That means where you allow kids to do things in different ways. They're still learning the same objectives, the same skills, concepts, processes, knowledge, but they can do it in different ways. So that's differentiation in process. Then you can also differentiate product, so the evidence of their learning. What kind of product, if they do a project or a paper or they write a book, how they show or demonstrate their learning. You can differentiate that and give them choice. That's another form of differentiation. Those are the 2 forms of differentiation that we saw the most, particularly process, and especially at elementary. We saw teachers, just the cluster classroom teachers, doing a very good job of this as a whole, giving kids choice and giving kids different ways to practice their learning. They could work in small groups, and we saw just many, many different examples of this. And we also saw examples where kids could choose what kind of product, how they wanted to sort of give evidence for their learning. What we didn't see enough of was differentiation in the content itself. And that is a much bigger challenge. That means that in a classroom, you have kids that may actually need different objectives than the other students. So if a teacher's about to teach a lesson on fractions, and you have 5 kids that already know how to do fractions, they already know that. I mean, just conceptually, they've grasped it, they've already been working with it. It doesn't really make sense for the teacher to include those kids in the lesson on fractions. That's what we call a need for content differentiation. And the structure in LISD just hasn't been set up for that. I think the culture has been more typically with teachers, well, I'm a 3rd grade teacher, I teach 3rd grade content, and I just differentiate the process and the product for the kids so that they stay engaged and the gifted kids stay on task. But the literature says that gifted kids many times need content to be differentiated. They need to go beyond many times the grade level. It would be ridiculous if a 3rd grader is reading at a 6th grade level to make them stay reading 3rd grade books. That just doesn't even make sense. We don't typically do that in reading, but we do it in math, and we will do it in science, and even in social studies, but that doesn't really make sense. And math, particularly in LISD, kids have had to go to other buildings to access different content, and so that was one of our findings. We said, really, you can give kids different grade level content within their same grade level classroom, and that's the GT facilitator can help support that. Now the GT facilitator has been able to do that to some degree when she or he pulls those kids, but better if it's more consistent across all the content areas, because you have some kids that really don't need it perhaps in English language arts or what they're doing with language arts, but they need it in math and science. And so that's a key part of giving those supports to teachers, and that's another reason why the curriculum is so important. Now the district does have curriculum now housed electronically, and what that means is if I'm a 3rd grade teacher, I can see what 4th grade math looks like. I have access to that. I can see 5th grade math. I can see 6th grade math. So now there is a structure in place that can support that. It means training and supporting teachers and actually doing it. And how do I do that, and how do I, using my small groups, and address those kids' needs for content differentiation? And that is really cutting edge. Just so you know, I mean, nationally, this is the idea behind RTI, the original idea that you are working with kids and that you can differentiate in a regular classroom as much as possible. And for gifted kids, they may need interventions, which is like a facilitator who can do that. But the ideal is that all the time they can have those things differentiated for them. Because how many times do kids say, well, I'm so bored because they're so excited to leave with their facilitator because that's when they're actually doing stuff that's maybe on their level. Better to have stuff that's on their level all the time. Now, we didn't see this probably at all in high school. Debbie, we have a question. Where's the microphone? Another question. So I'll keep talking until she gets to you. But that is something that we said was probably one of the weaknesses of the program. If that gets fixed satisfactorily, you would be truly a model program. I mean, that is very cutting edge. Yes,
I was
question.
just curious, when you talked about doing a literature review
Yes.
On the
Research.
subject of GT, did any of your literature include such works by authors such as Jim Delisle or Barbara Clark or
Possibly, I'd have to look.
Karen Rogers?
Karen Rogers sounds familiar to me.
Because there, in my humble opinion, I think the past year and a half, you've seen a lot more research that supports homogeneous grouping, ability grouping, which when you apply it, it takes away all of the variables that connect with socioeconomical, ethnicity, race, all of that. Ability grouping, but with flexible grouping built in. Not like the old days in the 60s where once you were pegged, once you were tracked, you stayed on that track until you graduated from high school. There's some movement, but it's still, the idea of homogeneous grouping has really come back in kind of in full swing, as opposed to heterogeneous grouping, which actually leaves a lot of teachers very exhausted. If you have GT kids, if you have kids who respond to normal ed, standard ed, you have kids with who are struggling, that's a lot of juggle within a one situation. And I just wanted to provide you with that because I did listen in on your school board meeting, and I did hear that one comment that came about that kind of generated interest with me was the mentioning of homogeneous grouping being a real no-no. Well, it's not a no-no. It's still an option. And in fact, there are other kinds of ways to organize a classroom. I did a whole handout about this, and there's a lot more than just clustering or just pull-outs. There are 38 other kinds at least. Mm-hmm. For example, you were talking about grouping kids regardless of ability. That would be like associative learning, where kids could be joined together based on interest, regardless of their ability. But then there's also the other spectrum too, the individual contracts, the individualized learning, independent learning.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a whole lot of that on the high school level, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of things that for the profoundly gifted or the near profoundly gifted kids in the high school level, those are the kinds of learning areas or learning, or how do you call it? Learning settings that you could really look into. I'm just throwing it out there because I think it's really not a good time anymore to put down the idea of homogeneous grouping, especially since it's come back in a good, positive way. I just wanted to bring that up.
I think that's good to bring out different perspectives, although I would say, go ahead, Debbie, first.
Okay.
I would say that the one concern with homogeneous grouping is when, and what's happened in the past, and it's been it's had very negative consequences even for gifted kids, is when kids are just identified and they're grouped and they're never moved. But if you're moving kids around and you can group them for different things, that's where pullouts can be really beneficial, or having kids meet in a different setting, sort of like the pullout, but for, like you had mentioned, for associative learning or something like that. That can be very beneficial too. And really the sky is the limit when you come up with ideas. But the fundamental principle of the kind of classrooms that can really serve gifted kids' needs and meet gifted kids' needs, where they're open-ended and they're probing and they're thinking and they're being challenged, those are approaches that are beneficial to all kids and all kids learning. It's just that GT kids will be so completely bored if they're not given those opportunities, although some regular kids too. But those kinds of classrooms usually allow for natural differentiation for the students. They can go beyond, they can dig deeper, they can go further with those things when they want to. Because when it's high interest for them, many times they will just go crazy with it. Yes?
Well, just to speak to what she was saying, what we used to have at the high school level, and I do have a son who is now graduated who was in high school when we was there, and it was a homogeneous classroom. That's exactly
the
what
leap.
it was.
Yeah.
It was a leap class. Those kids were together, and that's what the district heard from parents and students when they took that away. They heard
Yes.
very emotionally and strongly that
Yeah.
the kids were and parents were very disappointed in that. So that's what we had before, and it just kind of went away
And
and
if you
into
look-
the AP classes. So I don't know that we can't say that it didn't work, because it was working for those high
No, I
schoolers for a
wouldn't say
long
that
time.
that didn't work, just like your pullouts are working well in your elementary.
And it might be different for different ages.
Yeah.
Elementary, we may do different, but for the high school level, and middle school too, I have to say.
And that is something that we did recommend at high school, is looking at beyond AP, looking at different opportunities of serving gifted. If you have actual, enriched math or GT math classes versus, or, GT, some kind of multidisciplinary class, or something that's STEM-based, in addition to AP, just different options, obviously having that element of choice. And then they would be more focused on gifted kids if they want to, because some do and some don't. And so providing that choice. And so we did, our finding was pretty conclusive that AP is just not cutting it. It's not sufficient. Now, we're not saying to go back to what you had if it was focused in a single content area, because one of the things that we know, and one of the things I wanted to bring up about the differentiation discussion, the differentiation in content, because the research shows that if you're not differentiating and not giving them access to accelerated content, it's very detrimental, especially in math. Math is one area where, and it's probably because in reading it's a more natural thing to do. It's easier to accomplish because we can give kids access to higher level books. But in math, it doesn't happen. And that's an area where if kids are ready to do math concepts and skills that are 2-3 years above their grade level, they need to be able to do that. That it can be actually detrimental to them if we don't let them do that. And so that means that whatever you do, end up doing whatever innovative programming at the high school, it really needs to take all content areas into account and not be focused on, say, humanities or English language arts. Yes.
Well, one thing I wanted to say was the way it worked in high school previously, because we did have a primarily humanities-based LEAP program, was the English, history, humanities block, where it went and they still have that, but anybody can elect to stick their child in it now.
Right.
So every other day. History one day, English the next. One thing I think a lot of parents would be proponents of is to do the same exact thing for science and math. A lot of what the district is going to need to address, because a lot of kids are focused on their on the grade point average, how they're going to assess the multipliers to it. But I think it can be done. I don't think not serving students is the answer, obviously. But it would be, if they were concerned with us not meeting state standards, then to do that, I think would have been an easy fix, and still can be an easy fix by clustering science and math as well.
Right. I think the challenge is that the history English is still linked with AP. And so that's just a challenge, because in certain areas AP is not necessarily, because there's really a set quantity of content, particularly in history with AP, that is prescribed, that may not be a best fit always for GT. And I'm not going to tell you how you have to solve it, but at some point there has to be a balance, because with AP you have the issue of the weighted GPA. And that is a big motivator for a lot of parents, maybe less so for some kids, maybe it's for some kids. So that's another issue that has to be resolved. But like I said, we don't tell you exactly how to do it, but I agree with you. I think that, you know, those are the kinds of ideas to think about, but don't just limit yourself to just that. Really, because I mean, I go around and I would like to see people doing things that are foreign language and geography, that are, you know, social studies and foreign language, and even science and social studies, because those are things that you see on college campuses and you see kids engaging in, and not just AP.
We're going to take baby steps though.
Yeah, we have to take baby steps.
We got to get somewhere.
But at least having an idea, you know, a vision, here's where we want to start playing with this and experimenting with this, and where can we go? Because really the sky's the limit. Yeah.
So just to kind of go back to your point on math, okay, so
Yes.
that is to allude to the red tape, the difficult road through the LISD district for a gifted child in mathematics is beyond difficult.
Can you elaborate on what that
Yeah.
means? So, I have an incoming freshman.
So this is my third child I'm talking about. He is in 7th grade. We tested him before kindergarten and for accelerated placement, because he was gifted, accelerated placement. He had already done half a semester in London, and they said, you have to take this test. He has to pass this test. The only piece that he missed was currency. But if you asked him what a euro was, what a pence was,
Right.
he could tell you exactly what it was. And so he thought a quarter was not 25 cents. He thought it was 20 cents. So long story short, that was the start of this horrific challenge that we've had along the way. My elementary LEAP teacher, his elementary LEAP teacher was actually my oldest 2nd grade teacher, and she switched over to LEAP. She acknowledged that, to your point where you were saying it has to be teacher-based, right? That teacher had him in 3rd grade doing 6th grade math papers. She did that because she acknowledged the fact that he was at a different level than those other kids that were in that gifted pullout when it came to math items. We hit a road when we hit another wall entering into middle school. So now you're hitting the doors of middle school and you're supposed to go into math. Well, what do you do?
In high school now.
Well, we had to go take a test going into 6th grade math. You had to place into 7th, 8th grade math, I guess is what the level is. And so past that, moved in. Now we're sitting here going, okay, well, I think you should skip algebra because you know algebra. He missed that by 3 points per the standard test, but now he's sitting barely passing algebra in 7th grade. To your point, it's a quote-unquote pre-AP class with more work. Not that he doesn't know the content, it's just more work.
Right.
And then now we're sitting at the face with what I just mentioned before, having to go to high school for geometry, and because you're going to the high school for geometry, you are now taking, blow-off elective courses at your middle school. I'm sorry, teacher's aid, study hall, that's not a place for a gifted child in that kind of arena. So that's kind of where I've seen LISD is extremely lacking in the mathematics arena, and I would say science is a close second to that. I mean, we've put a lot of focus on the literature and the reading and the writing and even to some extent the history, but the STEM program, it's vacant.
And there's so many different ways to address that. And we suggested some in recommendations, but it's really for the district to decide, okay, how can we do that? Because with blended learning, I mean, now having kids being able to access things online, and they do blended learning at the high schools, that can just open up incredible doors. Yes.
I wanted to kind of add on to what I think is happening in this kind of situation. If you're getting a lot of work, math homework, and you're
struggling, we got to look at what's going on inside that classroom.
Yes.
What's going on? If the GT child is with other kids with different abilities, what's going on perhaps is her child's learning is put on hold while everyone else is catching up. As a result, you have a thick stack of homework to take home with you, which by all accounts, the GT child, had he or she been placed with like maybe in an ability group setting or a flexible group setting, whatever the setting may be, we'll debate that another time, perhaps all of that work that had gone home would have been carried on in class. It would have been processed in class. GT kids are looking for an appropriate challenge, just
Right.
like every
right.
other kid.
Mhm.
But if you're grouped in a math class where you've got brilliance in the GT kids coupled with a lot of lulls, a lot of holds, you're going to get stacks of homework going home, and eventually
Busy work. They consider
Right.
it busy work.
turns into busy work.
When it's,
Exactly.
yes, when it's busy work. Although I will tell you that there's been a lot of research. Math is the one content area that tends to be naturally tracked. Because
I'm sorry, we have several parents that need to go pick up their
Yeah.
students, so
let's try
if we
and.
could kind of go through and then take some more questions at the end.
Now, I think a lot of the comments and the concerns that you're sharing with me now, which is similar to what we heard while we were here on site, is actually great things to take to a focus group, to share in a focus group, because those are really, to really identify the main concerns and the issues where you feel your children's needs haven't been met, so that the district takes that into account in thinking about innovating for programming in the future. So let's finish up standard 4, but and really here, specific to GT programming, we didn't find a good structure in place to give feedback on how kids are doing in mastering those capacities and what is the evidence. So we didn't see clear assessment instruments that are specific to GT beyond those used for identification purposes. And we want to see more than just identification. We want to see progress. And especially for GT kids, you don't want them remaining static. You want to see progress in their learning, in their content mastery. And so that needs to be, that assessment structure needs to be in place. And we also found that there wasn't consistent feedback to parents. That was a big concern shared on the survey. That parents will say, well, they were identified for GT and I have no idea how they're doing. I don't know what that means. I don't know what they've learned. I don't know what they've done that's different from anybody or anything else. And then under standard 5, the one area there that we addressed was the budget process. We'd like to see budgeting that's program driven. So the priorities and how the resources are expended are tied to program goals and objectives. And that linkage was not as tight as we like to see. And so there is a strong budget for GT, but it's a little amorphous in terms of if you need more, then how does that, how are you justifying it? And so that was the weakness that we identified there. That's also linked to how the district does its budgeting. It's not built, the district budget is not tied to program priorities and goals and is not data driven. So we found that basically for the short staff, people have been doing an amazing job. There's still a lot of work to be done, obviously. So a lot of what we look for, what we want to see, these things under each standard, we saw in an informal way. For example, the planning. But we want to see this more formalized into documents and in a cohesive written plan that anybody can look at and can be shared amongst all stakeholders with clear goals and objectives for long term. And we say minimum 3 to 5 years. That's a good timeline for a plan like that. We also found that the straight criteria that the district is proficient or meets standard. What are the indicators again? Meets standard in almost all the state criteria. The only one that we found weak was probably parental involvement, where there is parental involvement, but not as consistent or as structured as we would like it to be. And then weaknesses in the program correlate. So some of the biggest weaknesses in the system, in the GT program, directly correlate with weaknesses just in system practices. So in policies and planning and budgeting. So it just makes sense that because those are areas of system weakness, which they're identified as such in the report, that would trickle down to an individual program. So here are our recommendations for the most immediate future, 6 to 12 months. We said get a GT department plan in place, one that's 3 to 5 years that has the philosophy, goals, measures, the roles, whoever's responsible for each goal, have that all defined. And then include in that plan the goals for secondary expansion. So we know that the secondary programming needs to be expanded, it needs to be innovative. That has to take place in the next 3 to 5 years and what that's going to look like. And so having goals for that identified in the plan. And then specify staffing formulas for the GT facilitators and LEAP teachers. Right now, it's a 1-to-1. GT facilitators are assigned 1 per campus, and that's really not equitable because you have campuses with 700 kids and campuses with 300 kids. And so campuses that have a lot more kids need more support. So just making that a little more consistent across the district and having formulas that determine how facilitators and that staffing will be allocated. And that includes with LEAP teachers at secondary. Then the process for clustering students, we said have clear guidelines and how those kids are clustered so that it isn't a burden to teachers and that you are doing heterogeneous balanced with those clustering, that's done strategically and not just, and it's a little harder in smaller schools, but really for that clustering, it's really about doing what's best for the students and also the most manageable for the teacher in that respect. And then we said to restructure the GT department. We recommended actually adding 2 staff, creating a director position because other similar programs have director level positions and they serve similar populations. So for example, if you have ESL, ELL as a department, you have special ed as a department, those are director level positions and you don't have a director level for the GT department, and yet it does serve 15%, roughly 12% of the total student population. So that's a lot of kids that are being served. That was one of our recommendations. We also said in how curriculum is developed, how curriculum is written and developed in the district, that needs to be cohesive and collaborative across the content areas with GT. We actually like to see that with all special needs populations. So it's integrated with GT, integrated with special education, integrated with ELL groups, that those subgroups, that's all in the regular curriculum, that all those extensions and suggestions for differentiation are provided to the teachers in there. Then we said longer term, 12 to 24 months, begin the planning for the revision of the secondary GT services. So that's really because there are some infrastructure things that are going to have to be addressed, like the scheduling, and the scheduling is going to be huge, and probably the GPA issue, the weighting. And so really working to identify where the challenges are going to be and what possible solutions can be to those issues, and how we can get innovative in the types of programs we want to offer at the high school so that our kids can actually take them. One of the things that we heard from high school principals is because of block scheduling, kids, I mean, there's only so much flexibility. They're tied. I mean, they just don't have flexibility or a lot of choice, and that's an issue. I would just say don't do block scheduling, but that I sometimes think the simplest solution maybe is the best one, but that may not be popular for some of your teachers or principals, but that's something to really look at. There are a lot of schools out there that do modified block scheduled, and they have certain days are blocked, other days are not blocked. I mean, there's so many different ways to approach it where you can have blocked periods and not blocked. I mean, they're really, if you can think it up, it can be done, and that's how it has to be approached. Then we also said student assessment. This is a big thing. We're good at putting programs in place and saying we're going to do this, this, and that, but we're really bad at evaluating ourselves. And I'm including myself in that because having done programs and run programs before, that was always the weakest area is assessment, and then giving feedback. Because assessment is really your measure, how well am I doing at doing what I said I was going to do. And if you're not assessing, you can't determine how well you're doing. And we have to, because that's how you know if your program's getting better and more efficient. That's critical. So there's a need, the identification process is solid. There's a need though for ongoing formative feedback on gifted kids' progress. Not just on capacities, but also in their mastering of content. Because it's just that issue, if your child has been identified, you're really seeing their progress, You're not just limiting, I'm going to see my child's progress in third grade math because they're a third grader. I'm going to see their progress just in math along the K-12 continuum. And that's just ongoing all the time. It doesn't matter how much actually, and this is another thing that you see in the research, how you group kids. We try to group kids homogeneously, and when you just look at it statistically, it's impossible. It's impossible because there are no two human beings that are exactly alike. There's no such thing as a homogeneous group of humans. It just doesn't happen. And so it's better to do kids by age, and just to make sure that the classroom, that the teachers are supporting the different needs, and it can be done. And they are the most vibrant, on-fire classrooms you have ever visited. And so I leave you with that thought, because there are places, and you have classrooms in this district that are high poverty, high diversity, that are amazing classrooms where, I mean, I was blown away. I would send any of my kids to be educated in those classrooms. All right, plan for deployment. Including the student assessment. Then, so attached to that is when you're assessing your students, then you know how well your program is doing. And so you need to be evaluating the program. And that's why we were here. That's what your district needs to continue to do. And I think, how frequently are you supposed to do the program evaluation? Is it every 2 years or 3 years for the state?
Well, they want us to do some portion of it every year.
Okay, that's what I was not clear on. So every year there's some portion of the program evaluation. And then planning for deployment. So all these things that we've talked about, the major areas of weakness. Okay, how are we gonna, we've got ideas and what we wanna do. What's deployment of that, carrying it out? What's that gonna look like? What's the timeline? What are our goals for the next 3 to 5 years of putting it all in place? And then outline the process for keeping you all informed. That's another critical piece. And then this is the stuff that we said is over the next 24 to 60 months. So after 2 years, I will say, I don't like to see anybody rush into doing different courses and changes. I'm always real leery of that, because I've been involved with putting programs into place or doing different classes and courses in place before I really felt that we were ready and that we had planned for it and thought about all the different contingencies. So my word of caution is, if it takes a little bit longer than you wanted it to, that may be better off in the long run. Because if you do something too quickly and it backfires, it could have been a really good idea that just failed, not because the idea was bad, but because its implementation was weak. And that's something that I always caution people against. And then finalizing the implementation of that expanded secondary service model, that's going to be your biggest challenge right there. That will be, but it's not an insurmountable one, absolutely not. I mean, that can be done. It has been done, it can be done. Thank you very much. Questions? Yes.
I know we have a lot of people leaving, and I'm about to be one of them. We talked about focus groups that are coming up.
Yes.
When can we expect to see those, and how can we find information out about that?
That's a Debbie question. Thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate it.
That's the Debbie question. That means Debbie has to answer.
Debbie's getting trained.
Yes, Holly's audit group, they talked about the need to not just do a quick fix, but really look long-term at our GT program and our plan and how we can provide effective services for students. And one of the things that they recommended us do is to start a task force. And that task force would then continue these conversations. If you're interested in serving on that task force, we really don't have a lot of details about it yet. I cannot tell you that there's a meeting next Tuesday. We don't have that set yet. This was our next step, and we want to continue to formulate those plans once we know how many people are interested, and this was a great forum to do that. If a task force, something over time, might be a commitment that's a little too much for you because you're very busy, like our house is running every single night, maybe a focus group that would like to then look at the information that the task force puts together and give feedback on that moving forward. The audit group has graciously given us suggestions that are not, all of them have to be done in the next 6 months, but we want to start that, keep the conversation going, and certainly start systematically getting the input that we need to start bringing things back to the board about what the community really wants, and making plans to design what we can. So if you're interested, this is just a questionnaire, and we have lots of them, and if people have friends that aren't here that may be, they can always contact our office, and we'll be happy to put that together once we gauge more interest. Did you have anything else to add?
An estimate timeline, I mean, not a date, but can we expect to see these in a month, in 6 months, in 12 months? What are we aiming for here?
So glad you asked that, like 6 months or 12 months. We have a second handout for you, and I don't know if we're going to have enough time to be able to go through that with you, but we do have an outline that's in the middle, starts showing critical areas of focus, 3 to 6 month plans, 6 to 12, and so on. And so these are the items that we are preparing to, with your help, create for our children. And I don't know exactly when Debbie might be thinking about pulling that together, but we've already talked with HR about personnel. We're looking to at least to hire one of the people out of the 2 that were recommended for this coming year. We'd like to hire, of course, everybody just for GT, but unfortunately, we have some other places that also need teachers as well. But we are already working on these plans. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions. One of the things that you mentioned a couple times fleetingly was budget. So that's just an overall question as to how the district prioritizes and budgets for this. As some of the other parents were speaking, and so I have, my 8th grader is my oldest GT student. So it seems like there's been a change in the district from how things were done however many years back in high school with gifted and talented to how it is now and then going forward, which we got to notice. Well, our kids just have registered for their 9th grade year that are 8th graders. We have word now that possibly there are going to be GT classes added at Marcus. So my questions are on that. But budget is a big, I'm wondering how the district received the evaluation and the feedback and budget, and how, I mean, how serious. We put money towards lots of things that are not, we put money towards a lot of sports things. We build a lot of things. I'm just, sorry, I'm just going to be straight up. And those, yes, well, that's a whole other conversation. However, we put money towards things that don't necessarily benefit everybody. And you even said, it, from a societal standpoint, it's a shame if we lose out on developing these gifted and talented kids and the resources because of what that holds for all of us as a society and how that helps bring along other kiddos as well. So I'm just wondering how the LISD approaches that, because we spend lots of money in other places.
Let me address the budget thing very quickly, and then you can address how the district.
I can hardly wait for my turn.
So our philosophy and our standard on budgeting is that if you have goals and objectives and a mission in place for your system, that you can trace those priorities back to how you're allocating your funds. That's really the foundational principle behind how we recommend you do budgets. I would say that it's probably less than 1% of the districts in the country that actually do that. And one of the reasons why we have this approach to budgeting is called program-driven budgeting or curriculum-based budgeting. It's so that you actually can determine how much in sum is being spent on any given program. And that actually can be a real challenge in most districts. If I go in and say, how much do you spend in a year on all special education services and products? It is rarely something that anybody can pull in just a few minutes because of how budgets, if it's zero-based budgeting, how budgets are put together and the coding that's used. I mean, with new software, it gets a little bit easier. And this is not my strength area, and I didn't write that finding because that's not my, finance is not my love. But I mean, that's just the big picture of it. So it's frequently a finding. I wouldn't say that, I mean, your district is fiscally pretty sound. I mean, especially compared to other districts that we see. I mean, obviously you've been dealing with cuts like many, many districts have been. But for us, the issue is more tracing the allocation of resources back to priorities and the programs that the district has in place. We like to see that kind of consistency. And now Penny can address the district response to these findings.
That's kind of my question is,
Yeah.
So what is the board's level of commitment to addressing all of these findings, a percentage of these findings? Is there going to come a point where they say, well, the budget doesn't really allow for us to hire additional GT facilitators of the elementary schools, or the budget doesn't allow, and so just make do with what you have? Just kind of, what is the district's level of commitment to addressing these findings?
So funny you would ask this today, because last night we had our first budget meeting. Our next budget meeting, I believe, will be in June, and then we'll have one in August as well. And so I think almost the very first item, as we went through, okay, this is how we allocate positions, and this is how many people we have, or this is how many people we would need not to have waivers. And now let's talk about what we need for the coming year. And I believe the first thing on it was our GT position. So when we had questions about, but you know, we have all those other things that, and our comment was, we had a GT audit. We have several things that we need to do. We're presuming that you would want to follow the audit because we want to make ourselves better. And so the board members clearly understood that this is a priority. They have a lot of priorities to look at. They are looking at what can we do differently so that we can have our money allocated exactly in the way that we want to have it for our students. So when you all talked about scheduling, that may come up. You know, you talked about scheduling being a problem. One of the things that you will see us doing will be adding the high school courses. Now, the problem, of course, it's a two-pronged approach. The schedule can be part of the problem, especially the schedule that we have now for high schools. And then making sure that we have created the classes that our kids want to take and will find quite interesting. And we did listen carefully about you wanting to have time for your children to be with other GT students. And that's what we're looking for. And we have another comment from Lori as well.
Just one quick comment. Hello, everyone. My name is Lori Rapp, and I get to work with curriculum here in the school district. One of the things we prepared in your handout is to let you know that while the state caps the funding for GT students at only 5% identified, we currently have had district commitment to provide services for we're identified at almost 10%. So we provide services for twice the number of students compared to what the state funds you at. We don't let the state funding drive our identification procedures and what we do in this district. So I take that also as the district commitment, what it has been and what I believe they want it to continue to be, to provide services irregardless of what the state decides to do. And then with the high school courses, in terms of convening the task force, we obviously have a lot of thinking to do about the secondary level, but we have heard you and your concerns, and out of the audit that for social emotional needs, kids do need to be together. And so we're looking at identifying math and science and language arts and social studies courses, a combination, a mixture, where students could have GT sections. And while that's an immediate response, that's not the long-term answer. We know we have a lot more work to do long-term, but we do want to assure you that we've heard, we understand, and are taking what action we can quickly to remedy some of that. So.
Okay, I've got 3 things.
Okay.
All right. So you talked about going out and doing campus visits. You met with principals. You met with LEAP teachers.
Yes.
Yes. You met with students. Or observed student classroom. Is that?
We did.
Yes?
There was a couple could bring students. Yeah, we did have some students come. Yes.
Okay. So I guess the one thing I didn't hear was, and as I mentioned, I've got 3 items here, so is counselors. And so really kind of understanding there is a lot of counselors in the district that are either green, I'll just say that, middle school, across the board. They're just getting their feet wet, just figuring out what they're doing in the middle school, learning the schools themselves. We've had a lot of turnover across the board, not just in our school, but across the board. I mean, so you got that situation. They're trying to deal with change in what these kids are going into high school with, right, with the new programs for the high school structure. So I think that there is also a area that hasn't quite been addressed is the counselors and giving them the tools that they need to address these GT kids. So I don't know if I didn't see anything in your,
No, and
that you hit that or not.
probably was something that we did not address, certainly not adequately. I don't know that, I mean, I do remember hearing some comments about counselors, but it wasn't something that we triangulated and really focused on with the other issues. But I do think that's something with the task force and with focus groups that should be addressed. I mean, counselors, that whole issue of counseling, especially as you get into secondary, with course identification and you know, there's so much influence in the courses that kids take and also the scheduling thing, that yes, that usually is one of those additional dominoes. So that would be something that needs to be.
So I would just highlight that as something to, okay, yeah.
Here, for the video.
One thing that I've been doing, and I do every year, counselors are required to have a 6-hour GT update as per the state plan every single year. When I first started, we had great big counselor meetings where they'd all come here, and we just I would talk kind of at them about GT needs and plan some activities, etc. What we found was much more effective is to go out and meet with counselors by zone. And that's kind of on my world tour of LISD each year. So for example, tomorrow morning, there's an opportunity for West Zone counselors to get together. Next week, there's an opportunity for East Zone counselors to get together. Sometimes it happened at Hebron High School not too long ago. All the counselors said, can you just come out here? And that's what I prefer. So although there was not a huge counseling piece in here, as we've talked every year and specifically now, I'm out talking to the counselors about the audit, about the findings, about what does that mean, and then answering specific questions that they have about their kids on their campus. So we're not talking in big generalities about lots of different populations, but how does this apply to me? So those are the conversations that I'm having right now in small groups, and they're going very well. And we do have some counselors that are brand new and some that have been around a while, but the questions and the discussion is at a level of sophistication that I haven't had before. So I'm really enthusiastic about the progress we're making.
I would just encourage you parents to ensure, I mean, that's the kind of thing, and also the comments about how well the board received the report and their commitment and things, that's where you are so important to keep those things on the front burner and to be reminding your board members, you know, of your priorities and the importance of these things, and also things like counselors, making sure that that is getting addressed.
Which that's a great intro to my next comment, because you quickly breeze by the fact that parent involvement was a weakness. Yes. And I find that as a very interesting comment. Having, like I said, been in the school district for 16 years at this point, I find that a little alarming to me, because what I have found is not the ability to have the information as a parent and not the ease of getting to the information or communication back to us, going back to the assessment of where do my kids stand,
Yes.
those types of things. Whereas I've actually spent more of my time focusing on what external things outside of LISD can I do to facilitate my son's giftedness, and whether it's the Duke program or it's some other college prep type items during the summertime, is trying to figure out, that's where I've spent and focused my time, is because let's face it, he's my kid. I'm concerned about my kid, which I'm sure everyone in this room does. I mean, we have an overall concern for the program as a whole.
Yes.
But if you can't find the door to walk through in the school district, you're going to find another door. And so I found it very interesting that your finding said that there is a lack of parent involvement, but what is the real reasoning for that?
I wouldn't say it's not on the part of the parents, and I apologize if that was the message that came through. That was actually the state criterion is, one of the state requirements in the state plan for gifted ed is that there be a strong parent involvement component. That was the one criterion that was probably the weakest in the degree to which it's met. Because the state has 4 different levels to which each characteristic or each criterion, or it's 3 that each, no, it's 4 that each are met. And that was one of the weaker ones. And it was really because we didn't find a consistent structure for engaging and providing feedback to parents in the system. Okay. So thank you for asking that, because that's not the message that I intended to convey. It's not because you parents, you're all just slackers and you don't want to know anything. That was not it at all. It's just that the structure was not in place. And we also found, it depended too sometimes on the facilitator or the building. Some parents felt like they were super informed, and other parents felt like they didn't hear. I mean, they were living in some kind of GT black hole. No, I'm not kidding you. I mean, those were comments that we saw on the survey, from different parents. And, and I could have drilled down. We try not to be specific about, because it's a system evaluation. So we try not to get specific by building, because we don't want it to be about, pointing fingers and assigning blame, because ultimately if a building is weak, it's because the system is weak. So we don't drill down to, well, who said that and which feeder area was it, and with the survey, but there was a lot of inconsistency and different concerns that teachers expressed about not only knowing what the services involve, but also just getting feedback regarding those services. So it was all over the board.
So as it relates, just a comment for you guys to take back, from a teacher perspective, from a lead teacher perspective, I've been very pleased. So I don't want this to come across as a negative aspect, okay? The teachers are doing amazing jobs with what little they have. Yes. They don't have a lot of support structure, trying to manipulate through the red tape of a lot of things. So I do want to make sure that that's communicated, that the teachers themselves, at least in my experience, have done those things that you're trying to communicate need to be done holistically across the board.
Yes. And I would say we heard that message as well, particularly with the facilitators and the LEAP program, that we say, if it's not broken, don't fix it. The elementary program, there could be some tweaking here. There are some, you could innovate some different things you wanted to do, but by and large, the parent response regarding facilitators was really, really positive. And regarding AP, not positive.
Yeah. So, and that's my last item here would be, you mentioned, I can't remember who mentioned that there's gifted training that's delivered to the GT teachers.
Yes.
Is that same training delivered to the AP teachers?
Yes. They have to. It's state
mandated?
State required.
But they're not necessarily assessed to whether or not they incorporate that within their program. Is that a correct statement?
Yes.
That is actually something that we addressed with, that's what we call monitoring. And if you look at standard 3, we addressed, principals when they're monitoring, when they're going and doing walkthroughs and visiting classrooms. That's what we consider a function of the instructional leader in the building, is coaching teachers. If they're not doing that, coaching them to higher performance. And it's not about, a gotcha type, but it's just about being collaborative and supportive to help those teachers do a better job. And that was another aspect of that instructional leadership that we found to be inconsistent. There are some principals that are really, I mean, they are doing an amazing job working at secondary, even working with AP teachers, pre-AP teachers, to really try and facilitate and support that kind of vibrant 21st century type classroom, and then others that it's not so vibrant. It's much more traditional, and they're not really monitoring for that per se. And so that was another area where we recommended for monitoring that's a principal piece, as they are really the linchpin, that design delivery connection. And so that didn't come out in the summary, but if you look at the audit report, that's in standard 3 on monitoring, and then the accompanying recommendations.
So on that vein too, I mean, I had written down while you were talking, you mean the training and accountability then, just to restate, I mean, because I heard you say several times building dependent is a term that you use. And it's human.
Inconsistent.
It's human nature, right? Everybody doesn't do everything the same way. And I get that. And I think to your point about the teachers, they're the ones, they're like the front line, right? So they're passionate. If they are in that field, they're passionate. We can't necessarily ignite that in everybody, too bad. But I think that there has to be, as a school district, a culture then, the whole school district wraps their arms around, where the training and accountability, what are the, in business we say KPI, right? The key performance indicators. So what are the KPIs? If I am the principal of the school, what level am I held to? What in my performance evaluation and my responsibility back to the community of families that I serve? That goes beyond just gifted and talented. But so what is it that motivates them to move further? Because I will tell you, I am in a middle school where our principal doesn't want discussion. It is not welcome. There is not communication. It is red tape. It is a battle. It is a frustration. Yet we have LEAP teachers who are beyond amazing. And I can't imagine the frustration they must face in having a boss who should be a mentor, who should be a leader, a facilitator, who is
a roadblock,
not helping.
Right.
And so my question is, why does the district allow that? Nobody asks me for my opinion or any of the other parents. I don't know what the evaluation is with the teachers. But if we're going to walk the talk, then I think there has to be transparency between the district and all of the rest of us so that we can work together to make it better. I think we're blessed to be in a community, regardless of socioeconomic or anything else. Everybody wants to do best for their kids. That's sort of an underlying universal theme, regardless. So let us do that. And so I'm sort of imploring that message to you, because you're going to go away unless you stay on, mentoring along for the school district to, and focus groups and getting us on, that's a first step. But I think that in whatever training happens with the principals and the teachers, and maybe not just GT, but certainly pre-AP and AP, but as a educational community, what are we doing overall to best help? And I know that we're working with fewer funds and resources and all that stuff, but you have engaged people who want to help, so bring it. When we say, oh no, I can't be bothered with that, okay, then there's a problem, but I don't think you will find that. But I want transparency, and I want to know if my principal or my administrator or the teacher is not doing a good job, where's the accountability? Where do I go? Not to gripe. These people have a tremendous challenge. I want to help, but I don't want to be blocked out.
Thank you. Well, you've pretty much summed up why I have a job. So, because that accountability piece is a big part of why people have us come in. And in education, for some reason, we don't function like the business world. We keep people forever, even when they're not performing. And so you do have different levels of performance. And if you look in Standard 1, one of the things that we did address was the structure. I talked about the organizational structure before. And this is a historical thing in LISD, where the good folks that were over developing programs and curriculum had absolutely no control or limited influence over the people actually delivering those programs. And that's a structural issue. And then that makes accountability for those things really, really hard. That has changed significantly in the last 5 years. We call what was formerly in place the siloed central office, where every department kind of existed its own little silo. People didn't play well together. There was even some hostility and fear across departments, and that's absolute worst case scenario. That has changed significantly, and people, gave us the history and the background, said, oh, things are so much better. But you still see leftovers of some of that. I mean, you still see people that's how they learn to do business, and they're trying to learn how business is supposed to be done now. But there still is a structural disconnect in that there still is not a clear line of authority over delivery of what is designed. And so that's something that we revealed, but how, and we don't, I mean, we did do a suggested organizational chart of how that might be reorganized, but that's essentially up to a new superintendent and a school board as well. I mean, the school board has influence over that. And there was a flattening of the org chart, which, we don't have a problem with that per se if there still is a clear line of authority of who's holding whom accountable, because there does have to be that accountability piece. And ultimately, it's the parents' job to hold board members accountable.
But to her point, the KPI aspect of this thing, if you're in the business world, you got KPIs, right? You get a review. Who do you get a review for? You get a review from your boss. Okay. What are one of the things that your boss does? Reaches out to your stakeholder for your review. There's no reach out to the stakeholders of these gifted children, or any child for that matter, on a administrator, principal, whatever you want, at whatever level.
And
that's a fundamental problem, that you get into this world of you're judged within your own peer net.
Right.
And you're not really focusing
and that's
on.
not very transparent.
It's not transparent,
Right.
and you're not reaching out to your stakeholders or the people who are affected by it.
And that's what I'll just throw out there, because now schools are having students evaluate teachers, and teachers evaluate. I mean, making that part of. I mean, that does happen in some places, and for different reasons. And it doesn't have to be the total evaluation, but it maybe can form a component where there is that stakeholder input. So but I've said this before. Unfortunately, we do things the way we've always done them because that's the way they've always been done. But nobody said that's the way it has to happen. I mean, there's so much latitude for innovation and doing things differently, and other places are doing it. I know Dr. Riddell wanted to speak to this because this has been an issue since she's had history in the system. This has been an issue that has been probably too close to her role and responsibilities.
Well, I was just going to say quickly, in the secondary world, simply giving people GT training does not make them effective GT teachers.
That is right.
You can give me orchestra training. I can sit through 30 hours of training. Am I going to have a good orchestra? No, my friends, I will not. And I would posit that it's the same in the GT world. There are some teachers that are very effective teachers. They are not effective GT teachers. And to say that simply because I gave them training, they're now going to go out there and do a good job, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's very good feedback. They are hearing that feedback loud and clear.
I think that
they know
we
that.
need to be careful in the secondary world that we don't put teachers in the uncomfortable position of making them responsible for what they are not good at. If they are very much an in the box, it's black, it's white, they are probably not your best choice.
Well, and you just described some of the AP teachers.
Look, I had one, this is my child in AP, who was told, okay, all you GT kids, I am done with you today. I don't want any more questions out of you. I am done with you.
We heard stories, more than one story like that about some AP classrooms, yes. So,
and I would say,
you are correct.
Having been a principal for 10 years, that the joy in being a principal is having those relationships with parents, with students, with the families, the grandparents, and creating that community that says, hey, we have a problem, let's get together and look at it, let's fix it. And there's incredible joy in that.
Dr. Riddell, I know you need to speak to us. I just wanted to quickly add on top of what Carol was saying, was maybe this is a really good time to think about hiring facilitators who are GT endorsed, not GT certified, but have actually gone through the empathetic training, that extra degree of training beyond the master's level, and getting that feel and the flavor of what giftedness really looks like. And I think that that will reverberate into great gains for the rest of the community, regardless of where that facilitator ends up teaching.
I appreciate your comment, and having been a teacher of gifted and somebody who taught teachers to teach gifted, I deeply understand why you would want for them to have not just the skills but the heart, because it takes both. You can have all the skills in the world, but you still have to have the heart. You can have the heart, but you still have to have the skills. Are they still certifying people? I think, yeah. I think that has gone away several years ago. But that doesn't mean that we don't have marvelous ways that we can both bring people in and send people out for more information. But that, I can find people that we can teach the skills to, but if you don't have that heart that comes first, your children won't be served well. And it goes for everybody else in the district. If your heart isn't here for the right reason, it just won't work out. So we're here to give you the best people, the best processes. We've taken our friends' advice to heart. We believe that we have some good things that we are doing, but we know that we need to do much more. And we're counting on you to be our partners. We can't come up with everything that we all need to do unless you're part of it. And so if we have ice tonight and our friends get to watch at home, probably in their jammies, let people know that we really do want to have people sign up, partner with us. How would you like to partner with us? We need to put together a structure for what it's going to become and when we're going to start doing that. And so we'll add that to our list. Yes, ma'am?
So for friends that couldn't come today or tonight, for anyone that couldn't come, can you give us like an email address for them to contact you if they do want to be involved? Because I know I'll have people ask me that when I go.
Would you like to use your address? Or?
TFW, no. There's a GT, Gifted and Talented mailbox.
There's a Gifted and Talented mailbox. You're always welcome to contact our department through that. We monitor that as closely as we can. I will send out, just as I did for a communication about these presentations, I will send out an attachment with that note on it for people that are interested in it, and I'm going to send it to every parent of a GT student in the district. So we can do that through our Skyward, just like y'all want one more notice from somebody, don't you? I know how that is. I'm a parent too, and I get them all the time. But I'll absolutely do that for people that aren't here. We'll post them on our website, etc. So I love to be accessible, and there's one of me, but I will do everything I can, do phone calls and those kinds of things just on the way over here answering questions about today. So please don't ever hesitate to contact our department about anything or any questions that you have. But utilize that GT mailbox because that's where we can kind of handle mass amounts of communications. And then it allows my personal one at work to take care of the teachers who are taking care of your kids.
What is that?
Gifted and Talented at lisd.net, I believe. I could be wrong because it's been a long time since I've emailed it, but there is a link on our website. And I'll send that link out to you.
And the video, won't this video be posted on the website?
Yes, this video will be
Watch
posted.
it, they don't have to ask for it, it'll just be posted, they can just click the link.
One thing I wanted to share about the comments just on schools and listening, we still are relatively new in our structure with our zone leaders, and they have been great partners for us with learning and teaching. As Holly stated, we haven't always had that in this system. This is my 19th year in this school district. I too have 2 kids, well, one and then one coming up, but have a passion for our school district, and especially when you've been here a long time. And the zone leader structure has been very helpful to us in learning and teaching in terms of that delivery and looking at the delivery of services, and it's still relatively new. So they're working with us as closely as possible to look at the recommendations from the audit and how do we work with our principals and our teachers in terms of engaging the community and the feedback that we need. So I just wanted to share that because it's still only like 3 years old, but we're working very closely together, and we appreciate your feedback today, and they will appreciate us sharing that as well. So. Are there any other questions?
Don't know yet. You guys tell me. I said, I'm here, I'll be there, I can be there no matter what, but if it gets canceled, then.
What I know is that we are supposed to have a phone call for weather at 4 o'clock.
They just canceled all evening activities just a few minutes ago.
Did they?
Yeah. It's
That would be our answer.
Oh, that's a bummer. That's you.
Okay, the second meeting will be exactly like this, except you wouldn't be in it probably unless you came right
She may
back.
be asking about we were going to piggyback with, after you, for the evening meeting for a parent GT meeting, and that has been canceled. That was canceled this morning. But we're going to reschedule for April 7th, so just so
Do
you
you
know.
want to take a few minutes and share now about the parents?
Quickly, sure, absolutely.
I apologize. My name is Seville Condis. I'm the president of the Gifted and Talented Association for Greater Louisville. This is our first provisional year. Up there.
You want you to stand up
Oh,
so
no.
we can video.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. Okay. All right. And
Readily
our-
available for everybody at home. Hot chocolate in there.
Our mission is to promote and safeguard the social, emotional, intellectual, academic needs of our students in LISD. And I consider this year the first where we are partnering with the district. This is our first main year, but we've actually been around for going on 3 years now. We are going to have a meeting at the Student Services Building on April the 7th from 6:30 to 8:30. If you have not joined our Google group, tonight I will post on our Facebook page the actual link, and you can get in there and sign up. Let me give you the Facebook page. It is Gifted and Talented Association of Greater Louisville. And we'd love to have you. It's free of charge. This is sort of like a provisional year, and it's my joy and pleasure, along with our board, to be doing this. We do this out of our love. We want to provide support. So please feel free to get in on our Facebook. And after I get home today, give me a couple of hours, look for that link that gets you right into the Google group. And each and every Tuesday I send out a TAGT Pulse, which is an e-newsletter, so you can keep abreast of what's going on across the state. It's academic, mostly academic. Lots of great research oriented pieces that you may find very interesting, regardless of what your child's gifted domain may be. There's something for everyone, and along with other activities to be coming up in the future. So thank you so much.
I was going to ask her to repeat her name again.
Okay, thank you.
What was your name again?
Seville, Seville, and my last name is Candas. And you can also reach me directly at my own Gmail. This is another way to get to me. It's Seville Condis, SEVILCANDAS @gmail.com. So if you have troubles getting into the Google group or you forgot the Facebook page, you can just get in touch with me directly. I'm happy to get you cupped in. Thanks.
Is there anything else for the good of the order?
Hi everyone, my name is Naseem. I have 4 kids. 2 that have graduated out of the district, my 3rd one on the way. And I just want to say thank you to the district for listening to us, for doing this. And I'm really pleased to hear what you're saying about how we're going to fix things. And I really am very, very grateful to all of you for doing this for our kids. Thank you.
We appreciate that, that you understand that this was a huge step for us. If we were going to do it, we were going to do it right. So we did an RFP, we went through a process, and I believe found the best folks in the world who could have done this. We knew that we had areas, and we knew also that it was important to highlight what we needed to be doing so that we could make it transparent for you. And so thank you for being with us. It's been amazing, and we will look forward to having you join it with us. And don't necessarily run down the stairs, but do go home safely. And we wish you the very best. Thank you again.
Thank you again to all of you. Really appreciate it.